morning. Welcome everyone to our bi-monthly morning discussion session. Actually, we have 3 presentations for today. Although we now have a quorum, but we really don't need one because we're not voting. We have a community grants update today, a community and economic development update, and
Tell him he's not on. I get that one.
I'll just say welcome again. Thank you. Apologize. I want to, other than to say we have, this is our September 25th bi-monthly report, bi-monthly meeting discussion session. No action today for the morning. And we do have a community grants update, a community and economic development update, and infant mortality and child fatality report. So with really no further ado, we can get started with the community grants update. Kimberly Shore and Bailey Arnold are going to discuss those. So come forward, and thanks for providing the information. I had a quick look online and got copies. So
yes, thank you. So I'm Bailey Arnold. I'm the grants administrator for the county. This morning, I will be going over community grants. I will first start off with a update for fiscal year 25 as that cycle has ended. And then I'll move into a status update for fiscal year 26. And then after that, we'll have some discussion points and questions for policy clarifications for the next cycle in fiscal year 27. So looking at fiscal year 25, these are the final disbursements of the awards. We had 27 organizations and a total award of $1,849,750. 26 of those organizations fully dispersed their funds, so we paid $1,837,086.69. And then we had one organization that didn't need the full amount, so $12,113.31 is left over for the county. So I have completed annual reports, and those should be with you now. These are kind of in the style of the ARPA impact reports. They all have one page. They summarize the approved activities, their stated goals from their contracts, results, and some narrative as needed. Just as a reminder as well, the community grants policy wasn't in effect until September 19th of 2025. So those reporting requirements in that policy do not apply to fiscal year 25, but we will be using those moving forward, and the reports should be a little bit more robust as well. So moving into current status of fiscal year 26, I'm going to recap the application and award process. We had 77 applications submitted. We awarded to 32 organizations for $1,816,812. We had one organization withdraw their acceptance of the award. They had $15,000. So we have actively 31 projects with just over $1.8 million. That would be Eliza's helping hands. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to recap the board priorities that were set out in the policy for community grants that I'll just list them out. The cultural, economic opportunity, education, health, and safety. Organizations self-identified with one of these priorities in the application process, and they were reviewed with subject matter experts for each of those priorities. So FY26 reporting, like I said, will be a little bit more robust. The reports that will be given to you quarterly will be in the same format as the one that you have in front of you today. The grantees are all aware of the reporting requirements. They have all received the training materials and the grant monitoring handbook for the new monitoring processes back in July. I also set up an online meeting scheduling tool to be able to give grantees the opportunity to speak with me one-on-one if they need any help with navigating the reporting process or how to request the draws for Neighborly. That's been really successful. I've had probably 20, 25 meetings with grantees. We're also going to use that tool for our site visits. I've already sent that out. We have about 20 site visits scheduled between October and December. So we're looking forward to starting that next week. And like I said, all of the awards are set up in Neighborly, and they are actively using them. This is just an example of what Neighborly looks like on the front end for the grantees. They have 3 tabs and a submission tab, but the first one is very quantitative. We want to know exactly the expenditures that they are spending per category each month, and then they have a list of activities that they can fill in, the number of people that they helped, the number of trips that were completed, if they had any surveys, and what kind of status that they're making each month towards that, and I can track that a little bit more easily than we had previously.
Can I ask you a quick question? Can there be more fields on like the expenditures? Can be more than 3 boxes? Or is it just 3
Yes,
boxes?
it's personalized for each award, so
It might be 10 boxes?
Yes.
All right, good.
You had 25 meetings with applicants, correct?
about 25.
About 25 out of 77.
Out of 31.
31 of
Yes.
the ones that were, okay, of the 77 that applied. I'm just curious as to how many of those were either refused or they had reduced funding because they failed to comply with the requirements. They either asked for rents, utilities, or some other disallowed expenditure. How many failed to follow the rules so that they could have received more funding or funding at all?
I would like to look at the applications again and with that particular lens, because I can recall several that had that instance where they did request occupancy, utilities, and things like that. So can I get you a number later?
I really would just be curious to get that information. I know that
Yeah.
county personnel or county manager, others contacted people and told them they had, unapproved requests in there, and they still weren't always fixed. It just seems like they could do better if we could prompt them somehow better.
Yes. I think there was, the change in the application process contributed to that, especially for organizations that had been requesting for years. They were used to the old process. And then the other part is some of the materials still had the occupancy. So I think there was just a little bit of miscommunication for that as well. So I am working on shoring up the application for fiscal year 27 and really cleaning that up so that it is clear, this is our policy, this is what we are expecting, so that we don't end up with that situation where we're potentially underfunding what the organization really needed.
And before we roll out the process for FY27, Bailey will have training with all organizations who want to apply so that we're clear on what's an eligible expense or not.
Yes.
But please understand, I'm in no way critical of the work you all do. I think it's superb, but there ought to hopefully be a way to prompt our applicants to do a better job.
Yes, I agree. And I think increasing communication with everybody the efforts that I've been putting into that has been helpful too, and helping them understand expectations. So I plan to continue to do that.
Great.
Great. Thank you. So the second part of the Neighborly report is qualitative, it's narrative. The goals that are written in to the reports are directly taken from their contracts. Some of these narratives are a lot longer than other ones, just depending on the involvement of the organization and the specifics that they said that they would report on. And then the last part is uploading documentation to support their report. So we ask for a monthly activity report, whatever tracking device that they're using, whether that's Excel or if it's a software that they use to track the things that they do, the number of people that they see. We just want an export of that to be able to see it. And then they also have an opportunity to put in anything like advertising, meeting agendas, meeting minutes, any pictures that related to their progress. And then the last part is their budget report. So moving into looking ahead, like I said, the quarterly impact reports in the style of ARPA will be provided with regular updates based on the format that I've developed for this current report for FY25. And then the rest of this meeting is going to be planning and questions and clarifications for FY27 application and timeline, just so that we can fine tune, answer some of the questions that we had as staff, and get everything kind of tied up before we open up the application period. So this is a current policy based about funding availability. We have statements in 3 different documents. The first part is the community grant policy, where on page 1 under under section B, general funding assistance, the wording that's used for that is directly from the budget ordinance in section 19, page 9, which I've also included on this. I can read these out, or I can just pause for a moment to have you read them.
Can I ask you one question on that first bullet? I read that, understand it, but I put a note within fiscal year. In other words, for example, is that a notice that if something happened like during the year, funds could withdraw during the year, or does that mean, is that what it means within the current fiscal year?
I guess that would be a policy question for the board, and whatever interpretation that would necessitate something like that.
I mean, I think on the staff side, I think that's part of why we're having the conversation, is like our staff interpretation and how does the board interpret it. So I would say on the staff side, twofold. Number one, it would be whether or not you even get funding for the year based on this. But then also if there was something that happened drastically in the middle of the year in a similar fashion where we reduced funding for departments, I think we could potentially in the middle of the year also reduce the same percentage for community organizations. So I think on the staff side, we would interpret it to potentially apply both ways.
It's good, and it looks like you could just change the wording to say, to make it clear that this could happen during the fiscal year, and if people ask a question about that, you can say, we would operationally, if we had to have a budget reduction, we would apply that equally across departments.
We can clarify that in the policy, sure.
Yeah. So
Good, thank
if you would allow me, Chairman, for me, County Manager Robinson, communication is key, right? We would have knowledge that we were in an economic downturn. So therefore, we would communicate with these community grantors in advance, at least 90, 60, 30 days in advance in terms of what that might look like, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we would communicate as soon as we would know, right? So it would be the similar fashion of what we would have to do for our departments. We would try to have as much communication as possible, as early as possible, if it was something to happen within the same fiscal year. Okay. So yes.
All right. Thank you.
And we do have language in the contracts that say, we can terminate the contract within so many days with notice.
With or without cause?
With and without cause.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's 2 different timelines for that.
Oh.
I do have one clarification. Clearly, the manager interpretation, funds are contingent and not available if an increase in tax rate or reduction in county department budgets is necessary. I would say that is the board's prerogative. And I raise this specifically because of what happened last year. We gave a cap and provided criteria, and if the manager used her discretion to recommend zeroing out community grants. That was not my intention. My intention, personally, as a board member, my intention was use these criteria and make recommendations that are worthy of funding up to the cap, and it would be the board's decision then whether or not we can afford to fund them. And I would encourage our adoption of that clarification going forward, because during the year, a change in the tax rate is not possible. And so that, I think, would not be not be an interpretation that would apply to the potential for reducing or terminating contracts during the year.
Correct. Yeah, I think, on the staff side, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that this is why we are bringing it up, because my interpretation, based on all of these three documents, is, my question is, what does the board consider to be funding available? And so on staff side, we consider funding available if we do not have to do these two things on an annual basis, but clearly it is a board policy decision. And so my hope is to get clarity today on if there is a cap that the board wants to make sure we are always working around in the budget or not. So I appreciate that comment, because that is my hope for today, is to get clarity.
Well, we had that example this budget year when we cut staff, cut employees' salaries, cut everything except community grants. So we have an example.
And I'll just weigh in that the way these have really been interpreted is from year to year, not within a year. And so if we did want the ability to cut a grant within a fiscal year, we'd really need to tighten up our community grant contract language to provide that. But that's not something we've done.
Board and I would have to ask, is that an example that you could give, and you don't have to give the particular organization? Has that come up where we've had to implement this process?
Well, obviously, if someone has breached the agreement, if they're not doing the services they agreed to do, we would not reimburse them for that. So we can terminate an agreement if it's not being complied with. So I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying if something horrible happened, like sales tax went through the basement and we didn't get enough sales tax, we don't really have a clear way of reducing grants right now. And so if that's something we wanted to do, that's something we could do, but that would be extremely rare.
Right, I would agree.
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest clarity is really just surrounding the annual process.
And I think at some point we're going to probably need to take a straw poll, because there may be different intents on the board about this issue. But I thought that the staff did an excellent job of vetting the requests and making recommendations, and it threw us back into the sort of the politics of the process to have the recommendation withdrawn and not available for use as a starting point.
I think that's the next slide. So we'll talk about continued clarification considerations that we would love board
I was
guidance
going
on.
to say that those quarterly impact reports are going to be helpful for me moving forward in terms of how we do our allocations to the organizations.
Yeah, increased evaluation, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this conversation is great, thank you. And then the third area that this language comes up is in the agreement itself, in section 18. So this is our clarification questions. So we brought up the idea of the cap that the staff can use for the number of recommendations that they make and the amount. I believe the cap for fiscal year 26 did follow the fiscal year 25 award, which was $1,849,200. And we can do that again, or we can use another amount. But we do need something to guide us on that. And then again, the question of what available funding means, guidance from the board and answering those questions that ultimately Chantel does need for manager's recommended budget. And then the other idea question that I wanted to circle back on was back in March, Chairman Martin, I think he brought up the idea of a cutoff date during the budget adoption process that organizations would be notified that there would be no funding. I don't know what that date would look like or what that process would look like, but that would give us and the organizations notice ahead of time that that would be the case. And then another point of clarification would be if the board wanted to make specific carve-outs for regularly awarded organizations that are awarded year after year for about the same amount.
Yeah, and I have been. In fact, I found my list at home of the organizations we funded last year, and I did think about that issue of things that are, because there are some organizations, Shepherd Center, for example, they do a lot of work, support, elderly folks, and they provide programs, they provide rides, they provide fix-ups, and it's mostly volunteers. They're just buying a few material, they're just trying to keep everything together. And that's something that I think recurs. And if we believe supporting that's a part of our mission for older adults, then I think sort of there's an organization like that could be locked in as a part kind of our budget, be separated from this project and say, and if we have to call it a aging department or whatever it is, put it as a subgroup, that things like Shepherd Center, things like what we do with senior services, those kind of things could be recurring parts in our budget. That'd be something that we would do. And it would be a part of the budget process that it could be contracted or it's kind of individually based because there were things that we do. But it should be things that our staff feels like it is complementing the work of the things we value in social services, for example, and in health, and in the things that we do with buildings that we provide building assistance with state dollars and all those things. So I think some of those could come out of this and be a part of a recurring piece in the budget that would go through its own budget scrutiny, and numbers. So, it gets really complicated because the example of senior services and the example of the Shepherd Center, you're looking at budgets that are probably 100-fold difference kind of in total budgets. Looking at large, very large organization, a lot of different monies, areas coming in, a lot of different levels of fundraising. You're looking at another one that has very little. So is that a factor? What percentage do we support of any kind of organization? I say all that is kind of complicated, but it would certainly make a difference between, it would distinguish the recurring operational things that are consistent with what our mission is, and then it would have other things that would be sort of these annual grants. And so, that's just a thought. I suspect, I looked at the list, I suspect that the seven of us would all have different things, so it's almost like you'd have to create we all vote and decide, get a consensus. If you got 4 votes for an agency to be in that group, it would be in that group. And that way we would sort of narrow that group down of recurring type expenditures. But I thought that would be a way to deal with that issue. And then it takes it kind of out of this process and puts it a part of our operation.
Yeah, and that follows the same kind of process that another county does with the sunset clause, where after so many years they become part of the annual budget.
Yes, and I thought of the reverse. You could, like in the grant parts, I'm sort of separating this group as kind of continuing operational to the other ones that, for the ones that are competitive, it would be like no more than 3 years, for example, or something like that, and make it clear this is not operational. This is a new program, a new thing, a new whatever it is, and to see if it works. And if it shows it works, then you have a chance to renew it for X amount of time. I was kind of thinking those thoughts too. But
Just a clarification question. Hypothetically, if we said our cap was 1.8 and you carved out organizations, would it be 1.8 minus the carve out? So then whatever is remaining would be
It
for.
could be done. I did think of that, because we were running almost like Guilford at the, we were more than 0.2. I think we were 0.3, I think it was. But I noticed, we're going to see it later here, we have the Guilford, that they have a policy that actually limits to 0.2%. Of theirs part. And yeah, it could be separated that way, or not. It could be. I think it just depends how you.
So I think one of the challenges in the past that we heard on the staff side was when there were organizations that were locked in. And so like, let's say your cap is 1.8, then there was not an opportunity for new organizations to apply. And so that's really why I'm asking the question, like, is it, the 1.8, then you're reducing the remaining amount and having a certain pot for anyone to apply that particular year.
So if I could weigh in, Chairman, I just would disagree with a little bit of that relative to doing the things that we've always done, right? When I first got on this board, we were funding individuals and we had no clarity in terms of their outcomes, what they were doing in the community. So I appreciate having the reports, the impact reports in terms of how they're doing on a regular, and the site visits. I appreciate that. I don't ever want us to, or ever want the board to get stuck in supporting organizations where we don't see making changes in our community. Commissioner Bessie sat in an organization on yesterday I'm keeping my eye on. It's called Fresh Start. And that organization could be applying. I don't know. But if they are, I don't want us to get stuck in the rhetoric of the list that we already have where we couldn't entertain other opportunities.
And I agree with that. I understand exactly what you're saying. But I'm thinking, I also thought of another example, Center for Creative Economy. It's a grant this year, an amount, but it has also been out of this and has been a part of our economic development. I mean, it's been a part of our economic development budget. It's been a part of grants. Senior services has been a part of our regular budget. It's been a part of grants. I mean, we've had a lot of different sort of configurations of these, and I see some value in. I'm not going to say that I thought of it's not a legacy organization. It's really an organization that fulfills a mission of this board that supports and extends what we would like to do, and now we're happy that somebody else is doing it, and if we can help provide some seed dollars, that would be good. I kind of see that as a group different from the others. But I also agree there should be funding available for other things, so you get the new idea and a new organization and a new thing, and that we would want to support the ground floor development of such a thing and evaluate it. I think we have a great, I appreciate this documentation, evaluation system, the energy that goes into that, and quite frankly, only organizations that are really interested in doing stuff and have capacity are going to do that. I mean, once people realize all the, you do have to do all this. This is not, it is for those kind of organizations.
I agree with you on one point. It would be complicated. You're talking in one vein about prioritizing, say, safety net programs over cultural or education or other programs that might apply. Another way, though, that I think funding is regulated is by the amount. Sure. Some need more than others, but if the International Film Festival can get along with $10,000 or $15,000 compared to several $100,000 that we allocate for the Shepherd Center, that's one way that we try to address it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
And that's where the cap would control that, whether it's a 0.2 or 0.25 or do it that way. But anyway, I was just trying to think of different ways. I was also thinking that part of this, we'll have an estimate of what our fund balance is, for example, in the spring. It's not perfect, but it's because a lot of things can happen to lock it in a number, but we'll have sort of an estimate. And if we believe that for any reason our fund balance were declining, then that would take the grants off the table, and that gets into Bailey's earlier point. We're not going to have grants this year because it looks like our fund balance is going to decline. We're not going to do that. If we don't have growth in our fund balance, then we should not be continuing this, maybe. You could argue that. I'm sure you would agree with that, Madam County Manager.
You know how I feel about fund balance, Mr. Chair. One other just kind of point of clarification. Again, one of your examples was, yes, we've had various iterations. We've had some organizations that's been part of county departments, then they've applied, and vice versa. It's kind of been an iteration of lots of things. What I would say on the management side, it is very challenging to have some organizations part of the department budget, because if I'm going to the department and saying, we need to reduce because of X, Y, and Z. The first thing they are going to reduce is an external organization, because that's not our top priority. It does not mean that it is not a great organization or a priority, which is why, for me, the preference would be, if the board wants to have a set amount, that we still keep it separate from out of departments, because departments already contract with lots of organizations for the things that they have determined that they need as part of their budget. So, I've given the example before of, we have a contract with senior services at the Department of Social Services outside of community grants for what they need. It does not mean that the community grants portion of senior services is not also necessary and needed, but when I'm connecting that in a department, and if I'm going to them saying you need to reduce, we're going to find ourselves in a similar situation. And so that's why my preference would be to still set aside, if the board wants to, set aside dollars that's specifically for community grants and not connect the two.
Which I understand. I think that's a reasonable position for you to take, and that if the criteria for departmental recommendations is what do we need for those services we are obligated to provide, then something that goes beyond is never going to be within the departmental recommendation. So we wouldn't be getting an apples to apples recommendation from the department. One thing, just for clarification, it's my understanding that we did not lay off or RIF staff last year. That any changes to departmental staffing were simply a matter of adjusting using vacancies. That's correct?
Correct. We did not lay off or reduce staff, but we reduced budgets.
And in terms of examples that we've used, the Shepherd Center are more modest in terms of the appropriations that they get from us. I think the Kernersville gets $25,000 this past year, and Winston-Salem got $40,000. It's the senior services budget that was $300,000 plus, and that was all for specific quantifiable Meals on Wheels deliveries. And the difference between that and what we contracted for is we contracted for that service to people who were otherwise eligible for programming within our Department of Social Services. The 300 plus people who would have had their shut-in seniors who would have had their service discontinued had we not funded it through community grants were simply people that did not, come into the program through other DSS, services, but they were and are people who are seniors and shut-ins, and this is often the only meal they get a day. So that would be an example of something that I'm always going to argue to continue, but I understand the reasoning against putting that in the departmental category where we're asking for a recommendation from departmental heads on that.
Hi.
Yeah, it could just be you could actually have within the community grants, you could actually have categories, types of grants, and you could have types of recurring kind of, valued grants to leave alone. Then you'd have the others that were competitive, and they would all be in the same umbrella, same budget control, same limits, same max, and you could do it that way, and that's pretty clean.
Let me add another piece to your puzzle. You also have to look at it. We do external and internal for compliance pieces. So you would definitely have to define how you're going to, if you're going to separate this out or add it to a different department. because I do external and internal, if it falls under the department, that means the manager of that department would oversee that organization. If it's considered external, then I would oversee that piece of that, so to make sure that they are in compliance and they meet all of the services that we are requiring for the county for that project that we take on, that we pay for. So that's another piece you have to look at, because you have to look at the monitoring, and the compliance piece is different.
Agreed.
Okay.
It is different.
Thank you.
So have we made any progress? I mean, I see.
Well, we'll continue, and then we're going to circle back at the end. Okay.
Yeah, there's a discussion slide. So the next point of clarification that we were hoping to get from you all is what an allowable cost is for the program. There's a snippet in here from the grants policy that specifies that indirect administrative and ongoing expenses organizations should refrain from requesting, not that they're completely unallowable, is how the wording seems to be, and that funding should align to direct project or program expense. For staff interpretation during the review process was that expenses for leadership or administrative salaries, capital or construction, occupancy, and utilities would be unallowable, and that was reflected in the organizations and the amounts that were recommended by the staff. And then there was a lot of discussion in the March meeting about, what capital projects could qualify under that program-specific language, and how the staff might need to rethink and rework how those recommendations are made. So if there was any discussion on that, or we can move ahead.
I do. I noticed on one example you gave us that over 3,000 was used for salaries. Do you have other examples of that?
Can you expand on that just a little?
Pardon?
Can you expand on that just a little?
Well, I don't know what page it was on.
It was the example in here that you gave in the software.
Yeah. So if an organization has salaries and personnel in their budget, it is tied to typically like a program manager who's overseeing that specific project. So if, for example, we've been talking about the Shepherd Center, we do support salaries for the Shepherd Center of Kernersville, and those are the individuals that are managing volunteers who are doing the projects. They are buying the materials. They are doing the daily tasks to make those programs run.
But we would not be covering like their HR person, their finance person. It's really direct services. It's how we've interpreted it. And I think, again, where there's been a little bit of confusion is because for legacy organizations, their agreements previously just said operating expenses. And literally we just gave the money and we didn't track, we didn't monitor. And so with this new policy, we've been really trying to be more deliberate about what does this mean, because technically we're not supposed to just give money to nonprofits without a real service. And so that's why I think we had more unallowable expenses in this last round. Just people, as much as we tried to explain, but still when you're used to a certain process. So we just want to be clear with the board, and then certainly as we roll out the process for this upcoming fiscal year, we'll be even more clearer with the applicants as well as we try to vet some of this language with the board. We did want clarity on capital. Based on the discussions, what we thought we heard was that the board did not want to participate in capital campaigns. But then I think during some of our discussions, maybe we do, maybe we don't. And so I think for us, we told organizations we were not doing capital, and we marked them as ineligible for capital. But then at the end, we ended up supporting an organization for capital. And so our question is, do we do capital or not? I don't have a preference either way. It really is just more of we want to be clear with organizations on what we do and do not do.
on the capital side, I've said this a number of times. I think if it's an organization doing, again, consistent with our mission of a task, and I'll use family services as an example. I think everyone here values the work that family services does, is consistent with service to the community and keeping them safe, for example. We have talking about a, kind of abused women battered shelter. I think we all see the value in that. At a 100-year-old building, they're going to take on a project to renovate and add on to it to make it work. It's work that we have supported in the past, family services in many different arenas. And the capital part, it's easy to measure. You just see what the piece of it is, to see that the project costs this amount of money. Those are documentable issues. And it's a thing that when they get it done, they're done. I mean, it's short term. It's usually 3 or 4 years. It's over. And then that project allows them to continue serving the community because they, a lot of times, can raise the money to operate, but they can't renovate or build a building. I mean, that's the big cost. And so that's why they're having a campaign that people raise money to do that. And I just see that as being, something that is a reasonable thing to support if it's on something that we value and believe it has, because it has to be a facility in order for the event to take place, the service. The service has to be provided in something. And so I just feel like that is ought to be a part of it. It ought to be allowable. It's not it should be available.
I'll just add that the county funding needs to be for particular services. I'm not saying it can't be for capital, but the capital needs to be tied to particular services that will be provided either to the county or to the community. So we would need to be careful, that the building, for example, is used for 5 years or 10 years or whatever, and then there would need to be monitoring associated with that. So it's not insurmountable, but it is an extra step that we would need to take.
And that's what I meant, being consistent with the services being provided in that facility, and that they would be consistent with what we do. So your point is in the women's battered shelter, if we're that example, that it continues to provide that service is the point.
I have a question about that for Mr. Attorney. If that extended monitoring period would conflict with the 1-year funding period that the community grants currently has. Hey, Gordon.
I'm sorry, I was having a conversation with our CFO. I'm sorry, what was the question?
So you mentioned a 5-year monitoring period to make sure that they're using the building as intended. If that would conflict with the 1-year funding period that the community grants is currently under.
No, and I just made up 5 years. That wasn't anything hard and fast, but it would need to be, you'd need to have a reasonable time. If you give, again, making up numbers, if you give someone $1 million, you don't want them to use it for 6 months and then sell it. And some of the people, we're afraid we're going to do that with cars during ARPA. But no, it wouldn't conflict, because as the chairman indicated, a construction project may take 3 years. And so, they're not going to provide that service necessarily within that 1 year. It may take them a while, but you want to have something reasonable to ensure that the county is getting a good bang for its buck.
Thank you.
One thing I might suggest is we could avoid having a strict prohibition on a capital contribution, but frankly consider those to be disfavored in this process, because typically capital construction is going to be over the size that fits in what I think most of the board are willing to accept as the community grants budget. Mm-hmm. So that, if you've got 3 or 4 organizations all coming forward with $500,000 requests, or sometimes $1 million requests, you can't do that without blowing a major hole in the total budget that I can reasonably anticipate the majority of the board being willing to set aside for community grant funding.
And there is an example of that in the fiscal year 25, where I believe it was Horizons Residential Center had requested maybe 500,000 and they received 50,000. So they would be experiencing a severe reduction in that as well. It is twofold. So this slide just has some definitions. I pulled these directly from the Treasury's 2 CFR 200, which we used as guidance for ARPA as well. These are just from the first section that have the definitions on them. And those are mostly just for reference for you. So moving ahead, on this slide, we have the comparison table. You've seen this before. I did update Forsyth County's information since we made changes to the policy. And then I also added Wake County, who they are currently only doing capital grants on a 2-year period, so that was a little bit different. And then I'll talk more about Guilford County. Moving to the next slide. Timelines. This is just reference again for the timeline of this current fiscal year. As we begin to figure out what that is going to look like, we will have the application, if it's approved, to be open during October and November per the policy. And then the budget adoption process will follow after that. And then the last slide, probably the most interesting slide to me. I contacted Guilford County when I started looking at their documentation for their what they call community-based organization funding, and to see what their differences are. And they, as was mentioned before, they have 0.2% of the general fund budget that is set aside. And then they have language in there that the awarded organizations are only notified during the budget adoption meeting, which is very different than what we did last year, where we did the recommendation presentation in March. So organizations were aware of that pretty early ahead of time. So that is something that we can consider. And then I have our policy and our ordinance side by side for comparison. So we could change the timeline as well following that kind of process.
I would say at a minimum for me, if the board decides, yes, we want to have a max amount, then I would be fine with providing staff recommendations similar to how we did this year. However, if we cannot come to some sort of consensus, then at a minimum, we would absolutely not bring you staff recommendations in March, April timeframe. We would certainly bring it as part of kind of the recommended budget process.
And in terms of one of my intents in supporting the process that we set up last year, it was part of the idea that would be separated from the main budget process in order to avoid the recurring situation where, less than 0.25% of our budget ends up eating up 80% of the time in public discussion of the budget. And that is the flaw. I see it in other boards. It happened with City of Winston-Salem when I was on the city council. And it basically, that fraction of the budget became the monster that ate the whole discussion time around the core major expenditures of the budget. And that's one of the things that I would love to see us get away from and be an example for other boards, what they should do.
And Guilford does follow that. When I was talking to their grant manager, I learned that their commissioners do all of the review, which I'm sure you all don't want to do, but they do all of that. They put together the recommendations themselves. They don't have staff making any recommendations, and then they make the announcement of the awards during that meeting. So very different.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what does their impact reporting, how do they know organizations are really moving the needle? So I would caution this board. I would just say to my colleagues on this board that although it won't ever be a consensus in terms of what we do with community grants. But I believe that we will always somehow find 4. So with that, I'm just going to express that the minimum that we could provide to set aside, but I do count on the staff. I rely on you for that evidence-based information on the back end. I don't have time to run around and verify if somebody has their 990s in place or structural organizations there. So I rely on the staff to do that, and I appreciate the work because I know it's a lot. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think that's the last slide. That's my contact information and grant program compliance manager's contact information. And that's the discussion slide. I know we've had a lot of discussion, but we have more.
We would love consensus, if we can, on whether, few things. One would be, does the board want to try to set aside a certain amount that we just, when it comes time to budget, we just work around? We will figure it out. However that comes to you, we'll figure out that amount. Does the board want to figure out how to carve out certain organizations? And does the board want to potentially support capital campaigns as an allowable expense? Certainly, staff would still provide a recommendation. You'd provide final approval. If someone comes in with $1 million, I think we all know we would not have $1 million to give if our cap is 1.8. So those are really kind of, I think, for me, the biggest 3 things as we look towards, we would be opening applications for community grants for fiscal year 27 next month in October. And so it was important for us to at least attempt to get some clarification in front of the board before we open up that process, because Bailey and Kimberly will be meeting with these organizations, providing guidance, and we want to make sure that it is the same as your interpretation.
Can everyone agree on a cap of some sort? Do we want to have a cap? I think we can surely get a consensus on that.
Yeah, a cap would be a good idea, because if you don't have some kind of cap, but where the cap is going to be is another question.
Good, so we have consensus on that.
So,
So now where should it be? That's the next thing.
I've saved my time till now, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. I think you had part of the answer. You had part of the answer earlier on in one of the earlier slides, and that was if any money to go to any of these programs that people would want to do, anything that would cause a tax increase beyond what all of the things that we have to do is, can't remember exactly the words you used that defined it. That kind of is where I would be, but you want to have some more specific things. The percentage of the budget, I don't know whether I'd want to do that or not. Maybe an amount of money. I wonder why that the state legislator over time has set aside the things that counties are required to do. So these additional things is either something that they've forgot about or don't really think counties need. I don't know which it is. So, but anything, I'd be glad to look at these things, and the capital matters needs to be looked at closely. Dan had a pretty good thought about very restrictive. And I've seen some capital things with some that we have done that, maybe not many, but that was questioned in my mind, because things that the organization was going well beyond what I thought that they did begin with. So, but if any of it, we get to a point that those specific things, or a group of them, in the end would cause for some tax increase beyond what state has required us to do, then that is a point that I would stop at. I don't know whether I'd get to that point or not, but I'd sure stop there for me. I'm not telling y'all sure to stop, but I'm just saying that for me.
Well, I think you can safely say, Richard, that this past budget, that part of the tax increase was because of community grants. And I'm adamantly opposed to that.
Small fraction, but it was a fraction.
It was a
an
tax
identifiable fraction.
increase. There's no such thing as a small tax increase.
And even if we, I agree that guidelines is a good thing to follow, but you can set the guidelines and sometimes they just somehow change. And what that is those of us that might decide, and I just use me too, as a whole group, that something might come along, well, that's something we ought to do. Well, that's where you get off out of the line, over the guardrail. So I don't expect that I'm going to do that, but I guess that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think, on the staff side, in absence of additional clarity, I thought the process itself went better in terms of the criteria, eligibility. I think the hang-up is funding availability. In absence of lack of clarity, I would be making the same recommendation if I did not hear otherwise from the board in terms of, as I'm putting together a budget, if there was not a way to absorb this within the budget, which there may be, I have no idea what revenues are going to do. But let's say if there was not a way to absorb it within the budget, my interpretation would be it is a board policy decision on whether or not you would want to either, one, increase taxes for these community grants, or two, reduce county services. And so that's really that's the biggest challenge on our end. That's the part of the process I did not like or did not feel great on staff side, and I'm sure also on the board side. And so I would say in absence of clarity, at a minimum, we would not be bringing you recommendations early.
Well, I think I would agree with that, because you're specifically saying that you would not reduce county services required in order to do some of this. And if I interpret that right, I agree with that.
Correct. I would not be recommending that on the management side, but the board can, of course.
Of course, I'd probably say in every organization, you can still continue to deliver the exact services more efficiently and spend less. There's so many variables. We're making the assumption that the amount of money in our budget is exactly what is required to deliver the services that are required. It may not be a true statement.
I would agree that it's going to be extremely rare that you have a bright line where you can say, if we send $1,000 to community grants, we're going to cut county services by $1,000, or we're going to have to increase taxes $1,000 worth. I mean, that is a hypothetical that you're not going to see in reality. We may need to just do a show of hands whether we've got a majority for this interpretation. But I would propose that we ask for an early vet process so that we have the opportunity to make community grant decisions before the major, the rest of the budget is set, understanding that we could still subsequently during the budget say we've got to cut a percentage of this, and either we can do it by elimination of grants that we had previously approved, or we can do it by percentage across the board. Just that the process that staff undertook to vet the requests, make recommendations based on deliverable metrics, I think was invaluable. I would like to have us do that again, and at whatever cap we choose to set, say, come forward with meritorious recommendations up to that amount, and then it would be a board policy decision whether to fund that set of recommendations or to modify it, whether we would have the opportunity to do that in advance of the main budget action. Did I talk too long, or was that a clear?
No, I think, well, I understood exactly what you said. I'm thinking if we could go through from a workload standpoint, do what we did last year, timeline, which was good, but in the process, we tell folks, and here's what I was thinking, by March 15th, we're likely to know our revenue picture for the year. We don't know all of our sales tax, but we know how it's trending. We also know a lot of our property tax is collected by then. So I was going to say then in March, if the fund balance is not expected to decline, if the fund balance is not expected to decrease, then the county commit to, say, $2 million a year, max. That's 0.0036.
But are you saying we would be committing utilizing fund balance for community grants? Or
No,
you're just...
I'm just saying that if the fund balance is not decreasing, we will budget $2 million for community grants.
And it doesn't require a tax increase.
Yes, and if our fund balance is not decreasing, it should not. And if you want to say that both, say both of those.
Both, please.
Well, I guess you could have a tax
Yeah, I
increase
was gonna
on
say,
county
no.
services.
That's right, you can.
Good on that.
Talking about community grants only.
The tax increase is the tax increase, whether relative to county services or these community grants. It's not separate.
I understand what Commissioner Wisenhut's saying. And that makes, in the hierarchy of the way we have discussed things and view the world from sort of the management side, then you could probably make the argument that if a tax increase is not expected, then perhaps you could go that way. I'm not sure I like that, but it could be if it's not expected, then we will budget $2 million. That would say any tax increase automatically negates.
That is
Yeah,
correct.
and
Okay,
you know,
you're-
right, and what I would say is the main reason for me on that interpretation is because this board has historically not increased taxes. So the stress level on the management side of, especially in my first year, oh my goodness, we haven't increased taxes in 100 years, and now here we're doing X, Y, and Z. That's a big deal. That has been a big deal for this board. because in the past, we've really just appropriated fund balance to cover those types of things. So if that philosophy has shifted in the way in which we manage our budget and county needs, then I think, certainly our management philosophy can change. But I just want you to know, like, that's really why that interpretation was so strong, is because that was just different in terms of how we have historically handled things. But if we want to try to reserve kind of what the previous year's budget was kind of as continuation and see how that goes. I hear you, by March 15th, we may have some, preliminary estimates on some things, still not announcing anything, but we can certainly try to maybe share what some of those numbers look like for the board to make some final decisions.
Mr. Manager, I hate to add to your problems, but I would just caution you that my philosophy hadn't changed very much in the last 100 years.
Yes, sir.
But probably hindsight on our budget situation, we made a lot of salary adjustments 2 years ago, a lot. And basically, we probably should, and as a result, we had budgeted fund balance and we used it. And in reality, probably because of that huge increase in recurrent expenditures, we probably should have anticipated that a fund balance was needed and probably had a modest one each of the previous 2 years before this year. And then we would have been, tax increase, what did I say?
You did fund balance.
No, I said a modest tax increase would have been appropriate in 2 years ago. And I'm just thinking that, to avoid having any tax increase, we ended up creating a hole that was going to have to be corrected at some point. And that was our own spending. It was not driven by community grants. This little $1.8 million did not drive that tax increase.
And in terms of what we increased in our budget year over year, I would note that the increase in appropriations to the school system year over year was sufficient to have made up by itself a penny of that beyond revenue neutral tax level.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Certainly a legitimate topic for debate and individual opinions, but I would not have knocked out that increase in support for the school system in order to have avoided that penny.
So if I may, my understanding of the direction that I should be going in is opening the applications in October and going through the review process with staff. And then from there, we will make a decision in March about how we want to move.
A funding level, I guess.
Yeah.
It's really about whether to notify people we're not going to be able to fund anything. I think that we were trying to say, instead of waiting and telling people right in May, before the fiscal year ends, their year and for the next year, that they're planning ahead. If we told them in March, they'd have more notice. I think that's the point.
Right.
Does that make sense?
What I will say is we can try it. I'm not sure. March is going to tell us about this fiscal year. March is really not going to tell us enough about next fiscal year, and so we'll see where we are at that time, and can regroup. So we'll start the process. We will certainly not commit to any funding with anyone, and we'll be very clear about that. I think I heard possibly considering capital as allowable, but it would just be part of our process of recommendations like everything else. I'm seeing at least 4 head nods. Oh, okay. And we're not going to carve out anything at this point. Everyone will need to apply.
That is correct.
I saw at least 4 head nods. Bailey, I think this is better than we expected.
Well, I'm just going to say, if we start that process in March, all of us better change our phone numbers, because we'll hear from March to May about the grants.
We will not be announcing anything at that point. We will just come back to the board with some budget a budget update at that time.
Right. But we will also be talking about community grants when we talk about that.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just nodding off.
I saw a head nod.
Well, thank you all. Have a good day.
Maybe.
Bailey, thank you. All righty.
You don't really know what we said.
Second item on our discussion agenda is a community and economic development update, and I think Kirby Robinson is going to give us that. Let me sufficiently put away my grants items and get adjust.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Board. On behalf of the Community and Economic Development Department, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to give you our fiscal year 2025 report. We are excited to share this information with you and answer any questions or concerns that you may have. In terms of the agenda, we're going to break it down into 3 sections. At first, you'll have an economic development update, then we'll move into a community development update, and then we'll end with a real estate update. And we'll present this sort of as our department is organized. I typically oversee our economic development side, so I'll present that part of the agenda. Ashley Penley is our deputy director. She oversees community development. She'll present that part of the agenda. And then I'll be back up at the end with a real estate update. I'm moving in the wrong direction. There we go. So our goal on the economic development side is to manage the funds the board sets aside to promote the establishment or expansion of businesses in Forsyth County that do 2 things: enhance tax base and create full-time employment opportunities. And when we look at incentives, and you've seen that in our estimates before, those are the 2 components that we bring to you: net new property taxes and full-time employment opportunities with benefits. There are 2 ways the board has laid out that they provide economic development assistance to companies, and these, of course, are aligned with North Carolina law. The first are business incentives, or what we would call local performance incentives. That is where the board provides financial assistance to attract target industries. And so in a previously approved document, which is called the Business Assistance Guidelines, the board said, we have a couple of target industries. Those are aviation and aerospace, healthcare and life sciences, advanced manufacturing, headquarters and business services, and technology and high-growth entrepreneurship. So that is most of what you see. When we come to you in public hearings, the predominant method that the board is using to provide economic development assistance are local performance incentives or business incentives. And then you have infrastructure support. So infrastructure support is where the board makes strategic investments for the development of industrial, business, or research parks. Eligible uses there include site prep, street and transportation facilities, extension of public utilities, and related improvements. And, I referenced the business assistance guidelines. That was approved several years ago. It's publicly available on our website. It sets out the minimum criteria that new or existing businesses need to meet to be considered for an incentive. And, like I said, that is several years old now. We will probably look at that over the coming year, even though this is a fiscal 25 update in fiscal 26. I imagine we'll look at that just to make sure it is still aligned with where we feel the board is now. And so if we want to propose updates, we'll bring you those in a future session, just an awareness of that's out there now. This is a very busy chart that shows a 5-year look back to fiscal 20 of incentives where we have made payments, and a 5-year outlook of incentives that have been approved by the board where we will make payments. And so what you see here are 29 different incentives, again, that the board either previously approved and have payments active, or that will become active in the future that have been approved by the board, and the company has agreed to come to Forsyth County and has signed the incentive agreement. So everywhere you see a blue box, if it's in the past, that's where a payment was made. If it's a future fiscal year, that's where we intend or think we will be budgeting a payment. And we'll give more information on sort of what these look like over the next couple of slides. Sometimes it's difficult to take all of that information and slice and dice it in a way that makes sense. And we can succinctly present. What we've done here is grouped incentives into 3 categories. One is completed. And basically that means that the board approved an incentive, the company made their investment, hired the people they said they were going to hire, the incentive ran its 5-year term, which is our typical term for incentives, and then closed. And so that's completed. Since 2015, you've had 12 incentives that have been completed. There are 4 active incentives now, which means that we are actively making payments. And there are 13 incentives that are approved, meaning the board has approved an incentive package. That company has signed an incentive agreement, but we are not making payments yet. So an interesting thing, I think, over the 12 completed incentives is to say, well, what happened? Oftentimes we bring the board estimates. The company says we estimate we will make a certain amount of capital investment. We will hire a certain number of people. That will equal new taxes, which then equals the amount of incentive we can pay and the net benefit to the county. But what actually happened? So you can see over the 12 completed incentives that we estimated, or the companies collectively estimated, $481 million of capital investment, a little over 2,000 jobs. Incentives are calculated, those estimates are a point-in-time calculation. We're using the tax rate at that time to make that estimate. At that time, we estimated $11 million of net new taxes. By net new, I just want to be clear that if you have a greenfield site, so you just have a site with nothing on it, the land value is not contemplated in that estimate. That's existing. But it's what the company constructs there. It's the machinery and equipment that they add there that goes into the net new calculation. In no year can we pay more than 50% of the net new taxes that company generates. So that incentives paid will never be more than 50% of the net new taxes that are generated. And then that gives you the net benefit, net new taxes minus incentives paid, net benefit. Okay, so the tail of the tape there is that over your completed incentives, the actuals outperform the estimates, which is good news. Over the 4 active incentives, you can sort of see the same thing. We have $677 million of estimated capital investment, 580 jobs as of 6/30 of 2025. Again, those active incentives will continue into future fiscal years. So far, we are outperforming on the capital investment side, a little under on the jobs. That happens sometimes over the course of a 5-year incentive, hiring ebbs and flows. We are doing, again, well in net new taxes. Incentives paid are a little bit less than we estimated. And the reason for that is when we calculate an annual incentive payment, half of that incentive is calculated based on the capital investment, half is based on jobs. So you may meet your capital investment, which is great, but you still have to hire folks. And so if you're not hiring folks, you're down on jobs, that reduces your payment. And then net benefit, of course, is overestimated as well. So approved, there is a wave in the future, which is great. That means folks are out there now making capital investment and hiring folks. We estimate over the 13 incentives that are not yet active, $413 million of capital investment, 1,500 jobs, $10.5 million of net new, with an interlocal agreement to the Utilities Commission to send those funds to them, but also then to appropriate the grant funds. You got that coming to you on Wahlberg. And then on the Tanglewood project, we actually still need to do an interlocal agreement with the Utilities Commission for those funds. You'll see all of those in the next couple months. And then to wrap up our economic development slides, it was interesting. I was at the School of Government doing a training a while back, and they said one of the most important things that companies look at when they're coming to a new place is obviously local and performance incentives are important, the state incentives are important, but workforce is one of the most important things that they look at. And so I thought that was interesting. And you see where we've taken essentially the 29 incentives that were on the previous slide, broken them down again by target industry, showed the estimated jobs associated with the workforce development programs that are going on with each of those sectors. One of the ones that stands out, and I think our staff and Andrea have done a great job of developing over time, is obviously the LEAP program, which is just super cool, where folks apprentices can go to community college and come out debt-free while working and training in their jobs. To give you some statistics on that, since 2019, there have been over 200 LEAP apprentices. This past year, there were 38 apprentices that the board funded through the program in the fall, 27 in the spring, and 20 in the summer, which is just a really neat thing. And then to close the loop even more, there are 9 incentive companies that the board has an agreement with that are using the LEAP program. And I think that is awesome. You see that heavily in advanced manufacturing. That program is funded with a $360,000 contract for SciTech Now. It's roughly $270,000 on that remaining. We haven't paid anything this fiscal year yet. So as that switches to an employer-funded model over the next couple of years, there's some funding to continue that. You see customized training grants. Those are grants from the state where the community college is going in and doing specific training with companies. There have been 6 incentive companies that have made use of that program. Health headquarters and business services, you see community college partnerships. That's really just a more intense partnership beyond customized training. And then healthcare and life sciences, I think, is emerging as a LEAP participant as well. Andrea had sent me some statistics showing that 4 LEAP apprentices now have completed their programs, work for Novant and Atrium, and there are 16 actively working through that program, which is pretty cool. And then to wrap that up, business incentives, the capital investment is great. It's what drives tax base. Obviously, jobs is a huge part of that, and not just jobs, but good jobs with benefits that pay a good wage. And when we looked at our active incentive programs and we said, what is the average wage across the active incentives? Right now, it's $60,000 a year. So with that, if there are any questions on the economic side, I can answer them now, or we can transition into the community development update.
Any questions for Kirby?
All right. Great. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley Penley. She's our Deputy Director and resident expert on all things community development.
I wouldn't classify as an expert, but I do my best to do some research, so we can do that for you, certainly. So I'd like to kick off this part of the presentation with just a quick overview of the community development programs that we're currently administering in the department. First being housing rehabilitation. It provides housing repairs to low-income homeowners who may have a special need, whether that be the need for accessibility modifications so that they can age in place. It could be that they need a roof replacement, things like that. So this program is available countywide, and we have had quite a little update. We are now able to extend services to the town of Walkertown through one of the funding sources that we were recently approved for. So that's a slight change from what you see on your slide. The second program we have, down payment assistance, is providing gap funding, gap financing to buyers seeking to purchase their first home within Forsyth County. It's also available countywide, but funding can be a little limited depending on the location of the home. So the last one would be code enforcement. So that's enforcing the Forsyth County minimum housing standards, which were established by the commissioners in support of the mission to create a safe and healthy community. It's enforced countywide with the exception of the city limits of Winston-Salem and town of Kernersville. So just to dive a little deeper into those 3 programs, we have a layer of multiple funding sources for each program. Mainly federal and state funding for both housing rehabilitation and down payment assistance, and then county appropriated funds for the code enforcement program. So each of the federal and state funding sources, of course, have their own stringent measures that we have to stick to in order to administer these programs. So we wanted to provide you with some data around each of the programs and the activity we've experienced in the last fiscal year. So to kick it off, housing rehabilitation, we've completed 19 homes, throughout the county. 13 of those were actually homes within the city limits of Winston-Salem, and you can see on your map there kind of the District A versus District B comparison. Overall, our total investment was just a little over $454,000, a mixture of state, federal, and local matched funds. But the neat thing about this program is that we can generate revenue on the administrative side. So in last fiscal year, we generated $92,025 in administrative funds, and that's from a few different funding sources. So North Carolina Housing Finance Agency provides reimbursement for the Essential Single Family Rehab Program and also for the Urgent Repair Program. And then we are also in a contract with the city to administer both rehab and down payment assistance. And you can see that we received about $65,000 in administrative reimbursements.
If I could just share, I'm glad to see that District A, the individuals, the constituents in that district know that the housing and rehabilitation is available. So it looks good.
Yes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too on another slide
Nice.
and what the future of that looks like.
Thank you.
The interpretation issue, I was counting the dots, and I only count 17 dots.
So some are very close, maybe on the same street, but if we have an Excel spreadsheet that we can share as well. So it does get a little overlapped there.
Thank you.
So this next slide does an even deeper dive into the total investments for the fiscal year. So you can see that each of those funding sources are broken down, and you can see the available funding remaining. We've also put in what those activities are for each funding source. So starting with local match, we had sorry, I have a glare here because I'm short. $59,000 investment with an available balance of $155,000. So you'll notice that these funding sources cross over multiple years. So that's why you'll see a larger available funding versus just the FY25 investment. Urgent repair, we had $97,700 with an available funding amount of $283,000. That is because we've received our newest award for urgent repair. We get those about annually. And then ESFR, this is the new funding source that I mentioned that we can now service Walkertown with. We did 92.8 in our last fiscal year. The new one is kicking off now. We have 182,000. That's our initial budget. However, if we extend that, we can enter into a statewide loan pool so that we can service more eligible homeowners. It's just on a reservation basis. And then our home investment partnership program. So this has the longest expenditure deadline. So we have 5 years to commit these funds. So that's why you'll notice a slightly larger available funding amount there. So we have about 1.9 available. And the reason or a contributing factor to that is that post-COVID, we saw a lot of people selling their homes who may have gone through our down payment assistance program. And so the money that we collected back from those buyers goes back into the pot to serve more eligible buyers with down payment or rehab. So that is unexpected revenue. We can't really plan for it, but we saw quite a bit come through in FY22 and FY23, especially with investors kind of stepping in and taken over a lot of those sales. And then the last funding source is the interlocal agreement that we have with the city of Winston. We issued $111,900, and that was through the rehab program. We have almost $500,000 available in funding. I think we have like 4 more rehab programs or rehab projects to fund with that available balance. And there is a little bit to cover administrative costs as well in that available funding. So all of those funding sources are designed to serve the low to moderate income. Urgent repair, we have to serve 50% AMI households or below. The others, we can serve 80% AMI or below. Okay. So moving on to our down payment assistance program, we assisted 19 buyers last year, all of which were properties purchased in the municipal limits of Winston-Salem. So 8 of those homes were actually new construction, and they were developed and priced specifically to increase the affordable housing stock. A total of $1.75 million in down payment assistance was provided through a combination of the state and federal funding that we have available. The state funding being the Community Partners Loan Pool through the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and the federal funding being our Home Investment Partnership and the City-County Interlocal Agreement. And then this slide here will show you that deep dive into the financial summary of each funding source. You'll notice specifically with the CPLP Community Partners Loan Pool, we have 0 funding available now. Staff received notification on, I think it was the first week of September, that those funds have been exhausted. That's because it's a statewide pool. We don't receive a county allocation annually for that amount. And Mecklenburg has had a lot of activity and swooped up a lot of those units. So we're trying to identify creative solutions to continue to provide the amount of assistance that's needed. We often find that the average amount of down payment of going into a home is $70,000. So that's $20,000 from our home program and $50,000 from that CPLP program. So between now and the end of December, we don't have CPLP funds. So we're in discussions with the city on how we can increase that $20,000 cap right now on the home program. Also, you'll see a pretty low balance with the IDA program. There's only 2,682 remaining. We've actually met with Experiment Self-Reliance last week to talk about some capital fundraising opportunities, whether that be through financial institutes or realtors that would like to sponsor the continuation of this program. Also, our home program income that we have, referring back to that 1.9, can help kind of offset if we have some buyers that come through before those commitments with sponsorships and things like that are identified. So total investment in home investment was $40,000 last year, but like I said, we have that 1.9, and that's split between the down payment and rehab program. And then the same amount for the Winston-Salem, Forsyth, and our local agreement. We have that $497 to split between the two programs and administrative costs. And so also for down payment assistance, we wanted to provide a little more in-depth comparison between FY24 and FY25 and the trends that we're seeing currently with FY26. So you'll notice that the number of units purchased, whether it was new construction or existing construction, are closely aligned in the 2 fiscal years. So we had 20 homes in FY24, 19 in FY25. But there's been a slight decrease in the average sales price. While the prices in the county as a whole have not necessarily decreased, we believe that the decrease in our specific data was due to the number of homes that were purchased with publicly subsidized incentives. So for example, the city-owned lots that were developed and priced specifically at our sales price limit. And also there was a community, I know it was Ridgeback Drive in Winston-Salem. They partnered with True Homes. Those homes were also designed to be affordable. So we are starting to see a decline for this year in production because there's not as many of those on the market anymore. So, for example, this time last year, we had already serviced 10 buyers. We've done 3 so far this fiscal year. So again, just trying to think through creative solutions to increase production of homes that are in desirable areas that may be new construction or rehabbed and priced affordably. So we suspect that, the decrease is closely related to market changes as well, just, high costs and low stock. And then, again, trying to work with partners who are publicly subsidizing new development. And so the last program that's currently in operation that I want to highlight is code enforcement. In FY25, we were able to successfully bring 47 homes into compliance with the minimum housing standards. 33 property owners voluntarily complied. 14 owners were issued orders that then encouraged them to comply with those standards. $22,173 of county funds were invested into this program. The majority of that, $18,000, being in demolition costs, and the remaining for advertising and legal fees. So staff recognizes that a priority goal for that you all have identified over the next few years is to explore affordable housing options through collaboration with the city, to explore partnership opportunities while continuing to operate within the county-defined responsibilities. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see the 3 community development programs I just highlighted, which all support affordable housing initiatives, rehabilitation and down payment, both able to serve within the city limits of Winston-Salem. While our staff is very proud of the success of these programs, they do have their challenges. We see a high demand for rehab and down payment within the city limits, and that's where our financial resources are a bit more limited. So as mentioned previously, the decline in down payment activity this fiscal year because of the market changes and low supply are a little concerning as well. And for the code enforcement side, it's often difficult to bring properties into compliance that have clouded titles or pending foreclosures. Those tend to take a while to move. So we may see some overlap between fiscal years of complaints that are outstanding. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see some potential opportunities outside of our traditional practice, which allows to continue to support affordable housing initiatives. Staff has observed implementation of these initiatives in other communities, and that includes financial contributions to a housing trust fund or community land trust, financial contributions to an approved low-income tax credit property for multifamily, or acquisition, new construction, rehab, development, just a little bit of activity outside of our normal realm of operations. And while we have a decent amount of funding available, specifically outside of the city limits, to potentially explore some of these initiatives, we have to keep in mind that those funding sources are restrictive on the types of things that we can do. So for example, the home program income that we have on hand cannot just be put into a housing trust fund. My understanding is that a board referendum would need to occur, and then general county dollars would need to be appropriated towards a housing trust fund. However, that home program income is eligible to go into acquisition, rehab, new construction, or development of a LIHTC property. We just haven't done it. Not to say that we can't. So to highlight some of the department's ongoing and future initiatives to support affordable housing, we continue to monitor opportunities for program efficiencies. Like I said, post-pandemic, we noticed that increase in payoffs from past participants. And so we would really like to identify where we can go with this home program income balance that we have on hand. We are trying to increase our presence at community events. And I will say that this last year, we've strengthened our relationship with HHS and getting involved with their monthly activities too. So I'm really thankful for that relationship. Also, communications has been helpful. You may have seen that we have an online kind of marketing campaign that's routine now to highlight our rehab programs, because we want to get out in the county a little bit more with that program. And then, of course, continuing to work with our partners like ESR on the administration of the IDA program to support down payment assistance. Staff is also going to be hosting a housing resource fair on November 8th at the Central Library. This is an opportunity for the community to come by, learn about our down payment assistance program. We're going to have lenders and realtors there, as well as all of our partnering agencies, so ESR, Center for Home Ownership. And it's really going to be a time for individuals to kind of figure out where they are in the home buying process and who they need to connect with first. So we're excited for that event, and if it goes off without a hitch, we'll take it on the road and go to other towns and municipalities and do the same kind of thing. So Yeah. So that's all of the updates that I have, but of course I can answer any questions or engage in discussion on what the future looks like.
Any questions?
Couple. So you've highlighted that there are more opportunities in the affordable housing area if there was revenue. It occurs to me that as we dispose of surplus property, it would be an opportunity if the board chooses to set aside a portion of that for available funding for this. The other thing that comes up, I know that building intergenerational resources is one of the chief values of home ownership, but failure to make functional will allocations is one of the primary ways that a resource, a home, is lost if there is no will, or if the will simply says the estate is split between everybody. And if you've got 4 children, that's a recipe for the property to fall into disrepair. If there were resources somewhere to assist will preparation for lower income homeowners, is that the kind of service availability that you could publicize through programs where you're working with HHS to advise clients of these existing opportunities?
Sure. So I will say that our partnership with ESR and the IDA program has a whole financial literacy course involved. I'm 80% sure that wills are discussed in that course. I don't know the specifics of, is there an opportunity for them to create one in class? So I can look into that, but I do agree with you that that's an opportunity there that we could expand upon.
The other thing I would add is one of the ARPA projects was with legal aid, and their whole purpose was to try to get out in the community and talk about wills, heirs, property, how to make sure all of that. I will get what their final impact report was. That was an ARPA project. I can't remember, but I'm not sure how successful that was, how many people, but that was part of what their whole goal and role was.
That would be a great piece of information to have. Thank you.
I'll just jump in for 1 second. Commissioner Bessie, I think the point on this disposition of surplus property. So one of the things that I think we were trying to get at here is counties specifically, at least according to the School of Government, have additional restriction on their ability to fund affordable housing with county dollars. So if we were to sell a property, that would be county dollars. Their opinion is that there would have to be a voter referendum, not necessarily a bond referendum, but a voter referendum to approve counties to use local dollars to support affordable housing.
This is the Institute of Government?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And so while we have a significant amount of federal and state dollars, which we have authority to use, using our local funds are restricted by that interpretation of the law. And I'll let Gordon chime in if he disagrees with anything.
Yeah, what you said is correct, but there is a difference in selling property as opposed to putting in county funds. So I had distributed a memo a short while back which kind of outlined the powers the county has with regard to affordable housing. It is very restricted unless you pass a referendum, as Ashley indicated, but there are certain things that could be done.
I'd like to read that memo again, please. Thank you.
I'll give you a copy in a couple minutes.
Appreciate it.
I'd like to unpack that too, maybe not currently, but probably in our discussions moving forward in the next quarter. Yeah. All right, thank you.
So what should it?
So there was one additional item that we wanted to bring to you. As staff has looked to operationalize the board's priority goal of addressing housing affordability by collaborating with the city, there was an initiative that has come up recently that we want to make you aware of. So back in 2024, the North Carolina Realtors Association commissioned a housing study for the Carolina core. So that's kind of the central portion of North Carolina. It's a way that they frame the economic development area along 421. And they really were looking at it from a housing needs assessment because of the growth that we expect from things like Boom Aerospace and the Toyota battery plant. See a lot of growth in population in this region. And they indicated that Forsyth County would need an additional 25,350 units by the year 2030. So one of the good things that we have going on is we've done a lot of things that are allowing us to get a lot of growth already. Most of those are really through planning and zoning efforts. Things like reviewing and analyzing our existing regulations, ordinances to address any potential unnecessary barriers to housing and make this a focus of the new. This is also a focus of the new comprehensive plan. Over 11 text amendments aiming at removing barriers were passed by the board over the last decade. One of those items is actually, I think, Commissioner Wisenhunt has requested Chris and his staff to come with looking at ADUs in the county and how we can make those more accessible. So doing things like that has really started to address those issues. But the city has actually been meeting with the Triad Real Estate and Building Industry Coalition, who has really indicated this is a priority for them and was hoping that the city and the county might take some sort of initiative on addressing these needs. So city staff approached us, the county staff, about a potential joint initiative to really kind of declare our commitment to meeting the housing growth needs for our community. Just want to be clear, there's no financial commitment here. It really is to continue to do what we're doing already, which is reviewing our ordinances and our regulations to make sure that they're not unnecessary barriers to growth for housing development to meet those needs. And so the city's asked if this board is if the county commissioners are agreeable, we could work on a joint resolution. The city would take it to the council members to approve, and then we would bring it to you to approve, basically just indicating that continued importance of focusing on meeting these housing needs for the community. And really that's just through the zoning and planning aspects.
And part of that, just FYI, Greensboro, Guilford kind of did something similar, saying, they declare they're going to have X amount of affordable housing units or housing units, not necessarily affordable, by X period of time. And so, for us, since it is a board priority to collaborate with the city, this is a potential collaboration to just really more publicly state what we are already doing. So it's within the realm of what we do. It's to say that we are supportive. This is how, and then we would jointly have like a joint resolution that we can send out to the Realtors Association and whoever else to know that, yes, you can also come to Forsyth County. We are friendly, easy to work with, and we have these things.
Sounds good. I do have a comment while we're here relative to economic development. The report that I received relative to the District A economic development around MWBE, I noticed that we did meet the state goal of the 10%, and we had exceeded the goal of 15%. However, I don't know if in that application process it allows you to identify your ethnicity. And I'm asking the question, you don't have to have the answer today. I would like to see the breakdown of that if it's available, or if they just denote that they are MWBE and that's it. I had some constituents ask me, although, we know that sometimes the powers to be say that they're MWBE, I just needed to know if those ethnicity points were there whenever they applied.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of that data that we have is really more so when we're contracting with companies to do services here. For the economic development incentives, certainly that's something we can ask and we can try to get the companies to provide, if they're MWB company, but also kind of what the breakdown of their if they're existing company, what the breakdown of their existing workforce is. And they can voluntarily provide that if they won't. I know on the back end, we do ask them for some information around the people who are hiring, the new employees,
Yeah.
what zip codes are they coming from? Trying to just assess kind of what the impact on the community is.
Yeah, I would like to know what the company is, what that landscape looked like. And then my last question was relative to the investments with the contractors for Winston-Salem and Forsyth counties. I know that we do a lot of business with outsiders, and when I say outsiders, that would be Greensboro, Charlotte, but I really need to know what type of work we're doing with those contractors inside of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County, those companies.
So are you talking specifically in regards to construction?
Construction,
So yes, I mean, we can provide a breakdown of that. I mean, that's your Bloom and IL Long and
and they are local here
they are local here.
not Guilford.
Well, Samet is Guilford. Belford Beatty, I think, is
They're outside the county. Yeah,
they're outside the county.
And there's some that have offices here but are not headquartered here. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of make sure that we are taking care of our own first, in the transition that we're getting ready to impose on and, move on now.
Well, ultimately, we have to follow the state statutes,
Absolutely.
right?
I'm not
So,
saying anything about that.
I'll have the attorney weigh in on that. I mean, right now, we're following what we're allowed to do.
Generally, this state law is that local is within the state, and so we really should not be not hiring somebody because they're from Guilford as opposed to Winston-Salem. As we said before, with certain other types of contracts, we have more leeway, services, for example. But we do have to be careful that we follow the law. And I know you didn't say this. I'm just going to say something, and I know this is not something you said, but we can't say we're only going to hire minority businesses and not women businesses. I know you're just asking for information, but in case that comes up, we can't separate out those categories.
Oh, I just wanted to know the percentages, and that would be helpful in terms of that MWB number. But no, I know that we can't say who we're not going to hire because they're local, but I think that the priority we should be looking at that priority for those ones that live in Forsyth County.
And I'll just give a plug to
All right.
the CD department over here. I think, for the rehab projects, I think most, if not all of their contractors are local contractors.
Awesome.
We have one in Greensboro, but the majority are in Winston, Poptown, Louisville.
That's good to know. Thank you. Thank you.
And just clarification, Commissioner McDaniel, on the MWBE breakdown, is that specifically for the construction contractors, or are you trying to get that for those we provide economic development incentives for?
It's for
companies.
construction.
For construction,
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass it back to Kirby.
We have one more piece for community economic development.
Commissioners, a quick real estate update. I've labeled this as surplus properties, meaning the county-owned properties that we're moving to sell. First is the Hall of Justice, and it is still for sale. It has been listed since February. It's a fantastic site and building. And we've had NAI under contract since December 20, for the calendar year, and it expires this December. They've done a great job. They've had a hard task, and they've gotten a lot of exposure to the building. They've done just a number of on-site events. They've banged on a lot of doors and called a lot of folks. We've shifted our marketing campaign. We did not have a price listed